Let her cook while we celebrate. That's what my daughter said on her wedding day. Loud enough for her friends to hear, quiet enough for me to pretend I didn't. My name is Esther Graham. I'm 67 years old, and this is my story. The clinking of champagne glasses rang out from the backyard like little bells announcing a celebration I had barely been invited to. The air smelled of roses, grilled salmon, and peonies, Melanie's favorites. I could hear music playing, laughter rising, even the tapping of high heels on the deck where the photographers barked directions for perfect candidates. And here I was, elbow deep in buttercream. My hands moved automatically now, smoothing the final tier of lemon cake I'd been working on since morning. My back ached, and my knees felt the strain of standing too long, but I said nothing. I didn't sigh, I didn't complain, I just kept working like I had for every major event in my daughter's life. Birthdays, recitals, graduations, but this one, her wedding day. This was different, I wasn't part of it. They didn't mean to be cruel, I told myself. Maybe it was the stress, the planning, the pressure. Maybe it was easier to leave me here in the kitchen where I could be helpful. I had offered, after all. I said I'd take care of the cake, but I never expected that this would be the only thing I'd be asked to do. The sliding door creaked. I paused, hand still hovering above the frosted flower petals I'd piped. Voices floated in from outside. "Where's your mom?" someone asked. "Oh, she's in the kitchen," Melanie replied, her voice casual. "Let her cook while we celebrate." Then came laughter, sharp, high-pitched, like a blade disguised as a bell. I froze. My chest didn't rise. I didn't blink. Let her cook while we celebrate. That line stung in a way I hadn't expected. I'd heard plenty of backhanded comments over the years, mostly from my daughter's friends or in-laws who thought that I wasn't refined enough. But this was different. This was her. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel. My reflection caught in the window. Soft silver hair pulled into a low bun. Flour smudged on my cheek, wearing the blue apron Melanie once gave me that read "Kitchen Queen." I looked like a ghost of the celebration outside, a relic, a servant. I didn't cry, not yet. But I did feel something settle in my chest, cold, clear, and certain. They didn't know. They thought I was just the mother of the bride, the cake lady, the woman who brought hand-tied bundles of lavender for centerpieces no one used. But I was also the one who had heard more than they thought I had. 3 weeks ago, I moved into the guest room of Melanie's home to help out. She had insisted it would be easier that way, and at first it was lovely. Late-night chats, wine on the porch, scribbling notes in her wedding planner. But soon, I noticed a change. Whispers, locked doors, quick glances exchanged between her and Zach that made my stomach twist. One night, I overheard something through the thin wall of the guest bedroom, something I should have never heard. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. I remember sitting there, clutching the sheet to my chest, staring at the ceiling fan as their voices echoed from the master bedroom, arguing. Crying, then silence, says. And later that week, Melanie snapping at me in the laundry room with a voice that wasn't hers. "Just stay out of it, Mom. Don't make things worse." Worse? I had done everything to make her life easier. I had picked up her dress, paid for the caterer's deposit, fixed the linen order when it arrived in the wrong color, and stayed up sewing ribbons on her flower girl's dress. I didn't expect applause, but I also didn't expect invisibility. I didn't expect to be treated like the help. But they didn't know what I had done after that night. They didn't know that when I went to Target the next morning, I bought something else along with the flower vases and lemon extract. A hidden audio recorder. It was supposed to be for protection, for proof. I didn't even know if I'd use it. But I had it. And after tonight, I just might. The week I moved into my daughter's guest house to help with the final wedding preparations, I told myself this was a chance to be close again. We'd had our ups and downs over the years, what mother and daughter hasn't, but I believed this time would be different. that she'd want her mom by her side for the most important day of her life. The first few days were hopeful. We drank chamomile tea in the evenings, shared Pinterest boards, and even stayed up once until midnight talking about honeymoon destinations. I remember her laughing at one point, brushing her long, dark hair behind her ear and saying, "You always make things better, Mom." I held that moment like a seashell, pressed it to my heart when things started to crack. It began with slammed doors, then the whispered arguments. Zach's voice had a sharpness I didn't recognize, curt, clipped, cold. Melanie's voice trembled sometimes, but I could never make out the words. She would come into the kitchen the next morning with puffier eyes than when she'd gone to bed. She'd smile and say everything was perfect, but her hands would tremble when she buttered toast. One night, I was folding table runners in the laundry room when I heard muffled sobbing. I peeked around the corner and saw her sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, face buried in her wedding robe. I approached gently, asking, "Melanie, what's going on, sweetheart?" She looked up like I'd caught her doing something shameful. "Don't," she snapped. "Just don't start, Mom. Please, you don't understand." I stepped back like she'd slapped me. I wanted to understand, I wanted to help, but something in her eyes told me she was holding back a truth too heavy for even me to carry. I left her there, sobbing into silk and lace, and went back to my folding. The next day, everything returned to normal. Too normal. Forced cheerfulness, overcompensating. It was like watching a glass house rebuilt with glue, pretending it had never shattered. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how deep it went. Until I saw them. Zach and Sophie, the bridesmaid. I remembered Sophie from Melanie's college years. Zach's ex, the kind of girl who always walked like she knew men were watching, who hugged a little too close and complimented women while scanning their jewelry. At the final fitting, I noticed Zach staring at her reflection in the mirror longer than he should have. Sophie smiled back, lips curled like a secret. That night, when everyone was asleep, I placed the small audio recorder inside the empty guest room, tucked behind a vase on the dresser. I wasn't proud of myself. I wasn't even sure why I was doing it, but something told me the truth wasn't going to come freely. I waited 3 days before checking it. I closed my laptop in the dark, holding my breath as I clicked play. The first few hours were silence. Shifting furniture, distant footsteps, then laughter. Familiar voices. Sophie, she really thinks this wedding is going to fix things? Zach, let her think that. She wants the fairy tale. But you're the real story. A beat of silence, then kissing. I stared at the screen, my pulse in my ears. I couldn't move. More audio followed, teasing, mocking. Sophie, she's so boring, Zach. She plans everything down to the napkin. Zach, she'll cry in that big white dress. I'll kiss her and picture you. I shut the laptop and walked to the bathroom before I realized I was crying. Not for myself, for my daughter, for every wedding photo she dreamed of, for every Pinterest board filled with happiness, for the look on her face when she finds out the man she's giving her life to is already giving pieces of it away. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call it off, but something stopped me. Melanie had already begun isolating me. If I stormed in with accusations, I'd be seen as the problem, the meddling mother, the jealous old woman who couldn't let go. So I stayed quiet, but I saved the recording. And as I decorated the final layer of her wedding cake, I added something else to the mix. Not poison, not vengeance. Proof. Because there's nothing more powerful than serving the truth at exactly the right time. The morning of the wedding was bright, cloudless, and unusually warm for early spring. The backyard had been transformed into a dreamy scene. White tents with flowing fabric, soft fairy lights strung between trees, and golden chairs lined in perfect symmetry on the lawn. It was the kind of wedding Melanie had always dreamed of, the one she'd cut photos out of bridal magazines for since she was 14. And I was in the kitchen, surrounded by pans, piping bags, and the unmistakable scent of lemon zest. The cake was nearly done, a 3-tiered lemon elderflower sponge, each layer frosted with whipped buttercream, delicate sugared violets placed like little secrets around the edges. I had started at dawn, every movement deliberate, every swirl of frosting, a silent prayer that today would go better than I feared. As I worked, I could hear music drifting in from outside, acoustic guitar, polite applause, laughter. A photographer poked his head into the kitchen once, looking confused. "Oh, are you with the caterers?" I smiled tightly. "Just the mother of the bride." He blinked, then muttered an awkward, "Right," and disappeared. No one had asked me to get dressed early. No one had sent a makeup artist. Melanie had given me a dusty blue dress to wear last week, tucked in a dry cleaner's bag like an afterthought. I hadn't even seen her yet today, not in her gown, not since last night. I was nothing but a shadow behind the celebration. Still, I carried on, my movements smooth, precise. When the final violet was in place, I stepped back and studied the cake. It was beautiful. I had created something that looked like love, even if love was the one thing being faked outside. As I was preparing to clean up, I heard hushed voices near the hallway. The bridesmaids, Sophie among them. "I swear if Melanie finds out," one voice whispered. Sophie laughed. "She won't, not today. She's floating in her own little fairy tale." Another voice chimed in. "Didn't you and Zach used to, you know?" "Still do, honey," Sophie said, her voice like venom wrapped in silk. "Last Saturday, guest room, while she was ordering napkins." Laughter, then silence. They hadn't seen me standing just beyond the wall. My hands gripped the dish towel so tightly it tore. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stood there as their voices faded back outside. Outside, they were taking group photos. The in-laws were toasting mimosas. Melanie's father-in-law made a speech about 2 families becoming one. Meanwhile, I stood inside with a ruined towel and a heart slowly hardening. I walked to the guest room, the same one where the recorder had been placed, and retrieved it. The file had been transferred to my laptop already, but I carried the little device in my apron pocket like a talisman, not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't let her walk into a lifetime of betrayal blind. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Melanie's future mother-in-law standing near the cake. She looked at me with a plastered smile. "It smells lovely in here. You've outdone yourself." I forced a nod. Then she added, casually, "Just remember, it's Melanie's day. Let's try not to distract." Distract? She smiled wider. "I know you're used to being involved in everything, dear, but today is about the next generation. Your job is to support, quietly." I don't remember responding, just an odd calmness settling in. Let them celebrate. Let them toast and pose and laugh. They thought I was just the help, just the cook. But they didn't know that I had the one thing none of them had, the truth. And I planned to serve it. With cake. I carried the cake into the cool pantry and closed the door softly behind me. It was done. 3 perfect tiers, layers of lemon sponge and elderflower cream, delicate sugared violets tucked neatly along the sides, like lace on a dress, the last thing I would ever do for this wedding. I peeled off my apron, hung it carefully on the hook by the pantry door, and looked down at my hands, floured, freckled, tired. These hands had raised a daughter. These hands had held her fevered forehead, packed her school lunches, clapped the loudest at her college graduation. And now, these same hands would end the lie she was walking into. I returned to the guest bedroom and opened the laptop again. I found the audio file, filed simply under Z and S audio. I'd listened to it more times than I could count by now. every word seared into memory. Sophie's breathy laugh, Zach's arrogant smirk in his voice, the betrayal, casual and cruel. I copied the file to my phone. Then I opened the email app and sent it to myself. Then again, just in case. I didn't trust the cloud or the internet. I trusted old instincts. I needed this file with me. I changed clothes. I hadn't worn the dry-cleaned blue dress yet, but now I did. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, pressed, and modest. Soft, silken material that swayed when I walked. My hair was already pinned from the morning rush, but I fixed the stray strands. I put on my mother's pearl earrings, tiny, simple, the kind she wore to church, the kind you wear when you're about to make a statement without shouting. When I stepped out, people didn't notice me. That was fine. The guests were beginning to move toward the reception tent. The vows had been exchanged. The officiant had left. Melanie and Zach were officially married. I spotted her across the lawn, radiant in her white dress, surrounded by petals and praise, smiling at guests who handed her gifts and wine. And for a second, just a second, I almost let go of everything. I almost told myself to swallow it, to bury the truth, to protect her happiness, even if it was built on rot. But then I saw Sophie, wearing burgundy, a color that was never approved for the wedding party. Her hand touched Zach's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He leaned toward her and said something that made her laugh. That was when I knew. There was no protecting Melanie from this. There was only revealing it. I slipped into the catering tent. The DJ was adjusting his equipment at the side stage, sipping from a soda bottle. I approached calmly. "Hi," I said with a smile. "Could I borrow the microphone for just a minute after the cake cutting?" He hesitated, but I reached into my purse and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "It's for the bride's mother," I added. He nodded. "After the cake? No problem." I thanked him and walked back to the kitchen. Time moved strangely after that, both fast and slow. I could hear laughter again, music swelling, glasses clinking. Then, "Now it's time to cut the cake." Melanie's voice rang out. "Mom, can you bring it out?" I picked up the cake carefully, its weight familiar and symbolic, like I was carrying the whole truth in my arms. I stepped through the glass doors. The guests turned and clapped. The sun caught the shimmer of the cake's glaze, and Melanie's eyes lit up. I smiled, not for them, not for applause, but because I knew what came next. I placed the cake gently on the center table. A hush fell as people gathered around. Melanie raised the knife, looking over at me expectantly. "Wait," I said softly. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "I have a little something to share before we slice this cake," I said, stepping up to the mic. Zach's eyes narrowed. Sophie shifted. The audio file was cued. I tapped play. The speaker crackled. Then the first voice rang out. "Zach, she just wants the fairy tale, but you're the real story." The room went completely still. The moment Zach's voice echoed through the speaker system, a stillness fell over the tent so sudden and so sharp, it was like someone had shut off the oxygen. The laughter, the music, the polite clinks of silverware, gone. Just his voice, broadcast across the elegant white canopy, exposed, amplified. "She just wants the fairy tale, but you're the real story." A ripple of gasps traveled through the crowd like electricity. Melanie's hand, which had been wrapped around the silver cake knife, trembled. She blinked once, then twice, as if trying to make sense of what she'd heard. Her head turned toward Zach. He was frozen. His mouth hung slightly open. He looked from me to the phone to the DJ, as if this were all some kind of prank. Then came Sophie's voice, airy and cruel. "She'll be crying in that big white dress while I smile at her husband?" People audibly gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Zach stepped forward, reaching for the mic. "Turn it off. This is out of context." I pulled the mic slightly back. Calm. It's not out of context, I said evenly. It's exactly what it sounds like. I turned back to the crowd. The bride's mother may not have been invited into the photos or the speeches, but I've been watching and listening. I looked directly at Zach, then at Sophie, who now looked as if her skin had turned to ice. And I couldn't let my daughter walk blindly into a marriage that was already broken before it began. Sophie made a noise, like a strangled laugh, but her confidence was gone. Her face was flushed red, then pale. Her clutch purse slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a thud. No one moved to help. Zach turned to Melanie. Mel, listen, this is insane. She's twisting this. That audio, it's fake. Melanie just stood there, frozen, staring at the speaker like it was a window into another world, into a truth she hadn't wanted to see. More audio spilled out. Zach, let her play bride. I'll kiss her. Smile for the cameras and go home to you. Sophie, she's lucky you're even going through with it. You could do better. I turned it off. Silence. No one clapped. No one moved. The fairy lights above us suddenly felt harsh. The lace tablecloths, the polished gold cutlery, the champagne flutes, they all became absurd, useless props in a play whose ending had just been rewritten in real time. Zach looked at Melanie again, this time with panic. Please, baby, I love you. She's lying. This was before, way before. But Melanie held up a hand. She still hadn't cried. Her lips were parted, breath shallow, but her voice was steel when she finally spoke. Did you sleep with her last Saturday? Zach's silence was louder than anything that had come through the speakers. Melanie nodded slowly. The white of her dress glowed under the lights like paper about to burn. She turned to Sophie. You said you were my friend. Sophie tried to speak, then gave up, her eyes darting toward the edge of the tent like a trapped animal looking for an exit. Melanie looked back at me, and finally her voice broke. You knew? I met her eyes, my own filled with unshed tears. I did. A beat passed. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because you had to see it, hear it. I couldn't let you marry a lie, but I couldn't force you to believe it either. She nodded. Her lip quivered. A tear rolled down her cheek. But her voice, when it came again, was steady. I want him gone. I want them both gone, now. The tent, filled with 200 silent guests, parted like a sea as Zach turned and stormed out, dragging Sophie behind him. No one stopped them, not even her bridesmaids, who now looked away in shame. I stepped aside and watched them disappear. And then the cake stood alone, untouched. 3 tiers of lemon and elderflower, truth baked into every layer. The tent remained eerily quiet after Zach and Sophie's exit. It was as if no one dared breathe, fearing the silence would shatter into something even more uncomfortable. The DJ didn't resume the music. No one went for the cake. A child asked her mother, "What just happened?" loud enough for everyone to hear. And still, Melanie stood there, shoulders drawn back, face ashen, bouquet clutched tight in her trembling hands. The once beautiful white gown now looked like a costume, something worn by someone pretending to be happy. I stepped forward, unsure if I should touch her, unsure if I'd crossed a line too far. But before I could speak, she turned to me. "Can you help me out of this dress?" Her voice was soft, strained. I nodded. We walked together, slowly, out of the tent and into the house, leaving the stunned guests in our wake. Some whispered, some pretended to scroll through their phones, some reached for champagne because there was nothing else to do. Inside, the air conditioning hummed low. Melanie climbed the stairs, each step slower than the last. I followed her to the guest room and carefully unzipped the back of her dress. She sat down at the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes rimmed red, lipstick faded. "I thought if I just ignored it long enough, it would go away," she whispered. "I thought every couple has issues. I thought it was just cold feet." I sat beside her. "It wasn't your fault," I said gently. She let out a laugh that was more breath than sound. "You recorded them." "I did." "Did you know it would play out like that?" I shook my head. "No, but I knew the lie would catch fire eventually. I just decided to light the match before it burned you." For a while, she said nothing. Then, "I should have believed you. I should have seen the signs." "No, sweetheart. You were trying to love someone. You shouldn't have to assume the people you love are deceiving you." She nodded, her hands twisted in her lap. Then, after a long silence, "I want an annulment. I don't want this following me. I don't want his name. I want it erased." "You'll have it," I said, "and more." Downstairs, the front door slammed. Zach's voice roared from the porch. "Melanie, we need to talk. You can't just humiliate me in front of everyone." She froze. Then she stood up. Walked downstairs, barefoot, no gown, just a long satin slip and mascara smudged like war paint beneath her eyes. I followed. She opened the door and stared at him, his tie undone, face flushed, Sophie nowhere in sight. "You humiliated yourself," she said evenly. "I just made sure I wasn't your cover story." He scoffed. "This is all your mother's fault." "No," she said without blinking. "You don't get to blame her. You don't get to rewrite this." He looked past her at me. "You're a bitter, lonely old woman. You ruined your daughter's future." Melanie slammed the door in his face. The thud echoed like closure. She stood there for a long moment before turning to me and leaning her head against my shoulder. And finally, she cried. Not the messy, frantic sobs of someone whose wedding just exploded, but the soft, exhausted tears of someone who had been holding herself together for too long. I wrapped my arms around her. We stood there in the foyer as the sun dipped below the trees and the fairy lights flickered on outside for no one to enjoy. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a servant. I felt like a mother. 3 weeks later, the wedding dress was packed away. The ring had been mailed back to Zach's office, along with a handwritten note that said nothing more than, "You may keep the lies. I'll keep my name." The annulment papers were already being processed. Sophie had gone quiet on social media. Melanie's former bridesmaids, once loud and proud, had stopped texting altogether. And our backyard? Empty now. The golden chairs had been returned. The fairy lights had come down. And the cake, never eaten, had been tossed in silence the day after, all 3 tiers of sugar and betrayal into the trash bin. But I had saved one sugared violet and pressed it between parchment in a book I hadn't opened in years. Because some things, even ruined things, are worth remembering. That morning, I found Melanie on the back porch. She was barefoot, in jeans and one of her father's old flannel shirts. Her coffee had gone cold in her hands. She stared into the garden where the arbor once stood, the one she and Zach had exchanged vows under. "What happens now?" she asked, without looking at me. I sat beside her. "Now," I said, "you begin. I don't even know who I am without him." I placed a small box on her lap. She opened it slowly. Inside, a worn photo album. On the front, embossed in faded gold letters, were the words, "Real Love Stories." She opened it and gasped. The first page was a photo of her and her father when she was just 4, covered in flour, grinning from ear to ear in our first kitchen. The next, her 6th birthday party with her face buried in cake. Then her graduation, her first car, her real first love. Family. "This is all us," she whispered. "All the parts I forgot." I nodded. "You don't need someone else to write your story," I said. "It's already begun, and it's better than anything Zach could have offered you." Tears welled again, but they were different this time. Lighter, warmer. "I'm sorry for how I treated you." she whispered. "You don't need to be." "I do," she insisted. "I was so busy trying to prove I was grown, I forgot who helped me grow." I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a key. She looked down at it, confused. "What's this?" "A door," I smiled. She blinked. "I bought a small seaside cottage 15 years ago. I never told anyone. It was meant to be a retirement dream, but it sat there, quiet, waiting. Just like me, I suppose. You want me to live there?" "I want you to begin there," I said. "It's yours now. A place that's only yours. No lies, no expectations. Just peace, and maybe a lemon tree if you're up for planting one." She laughed, a real laugh. "You're really giving this to me?" I nodded. "You gave me 27 years of firsts. Let me give you your second chance." She stood, still holding the key, and hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs might crack, but I didn't mind. We stood there for a while, the wind carrying the scent of the garden, the world finally silent. That night, she packed a single suitcase, left the wedding gifts unopened, left the dress behind. As she pulled away from the driveway, I stood at the gate and watched, and I smiled, because she wasn't driving toward a fairy tale anymore. She was driving toward freedom. A few days later, I received a photo from her. She had already painted the porch of the cottage, hung wind chimes by the door, and placed a single violet in a teacup beside her new bed. A message followed. She said, "Let her cook while we celebrate." So you did, and what you served was the truth. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back, "Some recipes take years, but the results are worth the wait." And that was the end of her wedding, but the beginning of everything else.